In a small village nestled deep in the heart of Africa, there lived a young girl named Zuri. From the outside, she appeared to be like any other child, innocent, bright-eyed, and full of life. But Zuri's world was far from ordinary. She was forced to grow up too quickly, taking on responsibilities that no child should ever bear. It wasn't because of necessity or misfortune, it was because of the cruelty that ran through her home, a cruelty that would mark her life forever. Zuri's mother, Mama Nia, had been a kind woman once, known for her beautiful voice and ability to heal with herbal remedies. But after the death of Zuri's father, Mama Nia had changed. Grief turned to bitterness and bitterness to rage. She blamed Zuri for the loss, believing that if her daughter had been more obedient, her husband would have survived the terrible illness that took him. At only 8 years old, Zuri was left to care for her younger siblings. Kofi, a baby who could barely walk, Ama, a wild and headstrong sister, and Kwame, a boy with a tender heart who still clung to the hope that things could go back to how they were. But life was far from kind. Zuri's mother would often yell at her, calling her worthless, demanding that she take care of the children, cook, clean, and do everything around the house. Mama Nia would lash out at Zuri, punishing her for the smallest of mistakes, while she neglected her own duties. Sometimes in her frustration, Mama Nia would send Zuri into the forest to fetch wood or herbs, knowing full well how dangerous the deep woods could be at night. And each time, Zuri returned, bruised, tired, and empty, but always for the sake of her siblings. By the time Zuri turned 12, her life was filled with endless chores and cruel words. She had become the caretaker of the household, leaving little time for her own childhood. She would wake early, preparing food for the family, making sure her siblings were fed and dressed. She would walk miles to fetch water, even when her hands ached from carrying heavy buckets. But her mother's hatred never relented, and no matter how hard Zuri worked, it was never enough. The breaking point one fateful evening when Zuri was 13, something inside her snapped. Her mother had been particularly harsh that day, shouting at her for the simplest of things. Zuri had burnt the evening's dinner, just a small mistake, but to Mama Nia it was unforgivable. She struck Zuri across the face with the back of her hand, sending the young girl to the floor. Zuri's siblings, frightened and crying, huddled together in the corner of the room, but Zuri could only stare at the ground, her heart heavy with sorrow. The pain from the slap was nothing compared to the crushing weight of the realization that her mother had never seen her as a child, only as a servant. As the tears filled Zuri's eyes, she felt the overwhelming burden of a lifetime of abuse, betrayal, and loss. She had spent years taking care of her family, sacrificing her own dreams, and yet she was always met with scorn. As her mother turned away in anger, Zuri looked at her younger siblings. Their innocent eyes watched her, and in that moment, Zuri knew she couldn't continue living this way. Not for herself and not for them. If she stayed, she would be consumed by the cruelty of her mother's words and hands, and her siblings would never know the life they deserved. The escape. In the dead of night, when the village was quiet and the moon hung low in the sky, Zuri made the decision that would change her life forever. She packed a small bundle with a few belongings, a piece of bread, a woven cloth, and a necklace her father had once given her. Then, with one final look at her sleeping siblings, she slipped silently out of the house. She ran, her heart pounding in her chest, her legs carrying her farther from the village than she had ever dared to go. The path ahead was unknown, but it was a path that led to freedom. For the first time in years, Zuri felt as if she could breathe again. As she disappeared into the dense forest, the weight of her past began to lift, but the trauma of her years spent in that house followed her like a shadow. The trauma of her journey. The days that followed were filled with both relief and terror. Zuri wandered for days, surviving on wild fruits and occasionally finding shelter under trees or in caves. The forest, though beautiful, was an unforgiving place, and Zuri learned quickly that the world outside her village was far more dangerous than she had imagined. Yet, despite the fear that clung to her, she could not return to her past. Every memory of her mother's cruelty, every slap, every harsh word haunted her. On the fourth day of her journey, while passing through a dense part of the forest, Zuri encountered an old woman who had lived alone in a humble hut. The woman, Mama Kofi, was known to be a healer, but she had a mysterious air about her. She welcomed Zuri with open arms, offering her food and rest. As they sat around the fire that night, Zuri shared her story, the pain of the years she had endured, pouring out of her in raw, unfiltered words. Mama Kofi listened, nodding sympathetically. "Child," the old woman said softly, "sometimes we carry burdens that we cannot put down, and sometimes the only way to save ourselves is to leave behind those who have hurt us." Zuri nodded, her tears falling freely now. "It was so traumatizing, Mama Kofi. I had to leave them forever. I couldn't live like that anymore, not for me, and not for them. I couldn't allow my siblings to suffer as I did." Mama Kofi looked deep into Zuri's eyes, understanding the weight of her words. "You did what you had to do. The pain you carry will take time to heal, but in this moment, you are free. You are no longer the child of cruelty. You are your own person now." A new beginning. Zuri stayed with Mama Kofi for many months, learning the ways of healing and finding solace in the peaceful life the old woman led. But the trauma of her past was never far behind. At night, Zuri would often wake from nightmares of her mother's angry face, the sound of her voice echoing in her ears. But with each passing day, Zuri grew stronger, learning that leaving her past behind was not about forgetting, but about finding the strength to move forward. One day, Mama Kofi told Zuri that it was time for her to leave the forest and return to the world. "You've learned what you need," the old woman said. "You are no longer a girl burdened by abuse. You are a woman who has the power to heal, to help others who have suffered as you did." With a heavy heart but newfound resolve, Zuri left the safety of the forest. She became a healer, traveling from village to village, offering aid to those in need, always with a kind word and gentle hands. She never forgot her siblings, and though she could not return to them, she often prayed that they would one day be free of the cruelty that had bound them. Zuri had left her past behind, but it was a journey that would never be fully forgotten. The trauma of her early years shaped her, but it also forged her into a powerful, compassionate woman who vowed never to let others suffer as she had. And in the end, Zuri found a peace that she never thought possible, knowing that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to leave those we love in order to save ourselves. So, what can we learn from this story? We can learn that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go of the past and walk away from those who hurt us. But it's often the first step towards healing, freedom, and discovering our true potential. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more videos. See you in the next one.